questions?
Yeah, Francis, I have a question about politics. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think the present Japanese politics situation is not good, and I want to do something. But at the same time, when I think about politics, I was caught up in duality. So is there anything to do in non-dual way to improve the Japanese political situation?
Act impersonally. You would be one-of-a-kind politician. And besides, I don't know Japan's specifics. And even if I knew, I wouldn't have a clue. I think the perfect politician is a politician who doesn't want to be elected, who doesn't want to be there, who is pushed. And you can see that with the fake politicians we have nowadays, that whereas in fact they very much want to be elected, they pretend that they don't, and they pretend that they are asked, you know, that they are pushed by, but, you know, they pretend because they know that there is truth, you know, that at times of war, for instance, nobody wants to be a politician. Then comes a Churchill, you know, then comes a real head of state who is impersonal because nobody else wants to take the job given the situation. Well, I've been around politicians. It requires special skills, you know, like to please everybody and to make all kinds of promises that they want, that they couldn't care less about once they are there. It's a kind of politician's Alzheimer's. They will promise to you everything in order to get your vote. The smart ones, the ones that are lawyers, they promise without promising. They promise with fine prints, you see? So then they can say, oh, no, 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 that's not what I said. You didn't read the fine prints, you know, and there is this 10 pages of fine prints, you know, when You know, read when you go to, you subscribe to a new website, you know, they want you to say, I agree, and you agree to a lot of bullshit. There should be in the Constitution an amendment that bars lawyers from becoming politicians.
We'll have the lawyers write the amendment.
With fine prints. Now it should be a very short text without fine prints. Whoever has ever been a lawyer, ever been a member of the bar or whatever, or even has a law degree, no elected position. Not married to one. That would be already a big improvement, at least in America, I don't know Japan. As you can see, I'm not taking sides.
No real estate moguls either.
What?
No real estate moguls.
Moguls. Why not? If they are smart. You asked me for a piece of advice about politics, and my piece of advice is stay away.
Okay, thank you.
Don't become one of the dirty, rotten scoundrels.
Does consciousness need us? Do we?
Consciousness needs nothing? That's a very simple answer.
And is there a reason?
No reason.
Why we are here?
The only reason is fun. Fun. Well, that sums it up. Stay away, no reason. Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah. Don't play with it. Just leave it on. Don't touch the button.
Wasn't me.
No, yeah, I know it's not you. It's whoever it is.
So, yeah, this last question provoked something I've been thinking about for a long time. when I was a kid, I remember asking my parents, like, what if there are no people? Well, there'd still be the world. What if there's no world? Well, there's the universe. What if there's no universe? Well, then there'd be nothing. I was like, how? There can't be nothing, you know? And then I hear you say, nothing comes from nothing. I was like, yes, I was right. Great. But then, I guess it provokes a bigger question of like, was there ever a time? Will there ever be a time? Could there, like, would consciousness exist without manifestation or experience? Or it seems like it's in the nature of consciousness to constantly be creating. So it's just like a curiosity of mine.
Constantly yes, constantly assumes time somehow, you see. Constantly in time, it keeps creating as time goes on. But if consciousness is prior to time, constantly means in this case something else. Timelessness, eternity. So time is created out of eternity, yes, or timelessness. Time is created out of a place where there is no time. And time is perceived by a place where there is no time either. Time cannot perceive time. And in particular, the mind is the child of time. So the mind cannot conceive time.
So do you,
Yes?
do you think it would, I don't know why it matters, but do you think it's possible for consciousness to exist solely on its own, nothing else but consciousness?
Yes.
Why not?
It always is on its own. You ask this question because you believe the manifestation to be other than consciousness.
True.
You see, consciousness is always alone, exists always on its own.
Yeah, I imagine it like it is some sort of nothingness, emptiness, and then all of this fills its space, but that's not it.
See it as that which perceives in you, the reality that perceives, and which itself, although it is always present, is not perceived as an object. So in that sense it cannot be conceived or conceptualized, because the mind can only conceptualize objects, visualize objects.
Yeah, and that's perfect because it leads to my next question that I was thinking about today. That since I'm the perceiver, anything perceived isn't the real me. So there's no possible way that I can I perceive the perceiver? I can't know it in that way.
Yes, you cannot perceive it as an object, you cannot perceive it in the mind as a perception, sensation, or a thought. But it doesn't mean you cannot perceive it, meaning it doesn't mean it cannot perceive itself, because you are aware that you are aware. So this knowledge we have to be aware doesn't come from the mind. That's why it has more certainty to it. We have no doubt that we are aware in this moment, right? Everything else we perceive, it could be a dream, it could be not real, but awareness itself is real. That's why this seventh sense, if you will, of perception through which awareness perceives itself is different from the others and comes with this perfume of reality. In ignorance, we believe that that which is perceived is real, the world, the body, and we don't pay attention to that which perceives, and we think it is not real, that it is more like a dream or like a thought. It's part of this ill-defined thing we call the intellect or the brain or whatever. And then we realize that that which perceives is real. Otherwise, how could we really know anything if that which perceives was not real, you see? So then there is a transfer of reality that takes place from the perceived to the perceiver. And then we realize that whatever is perceived is made of the perceiver, is made of this reality. because there is only one reality. So in ignorance, only that which is perceived is real, and then we realize that that which perceives is in fact real. But then we realize that also that which is perceived is simply an extension of the real, of that is made out of the same substance. Then the questions why don't arise. Why? Because, because that's what it is.
I've been asking why my entire life.
If you listen to a beautiful song or a beautiful poem or whatever, you don't ask why. Listening to the poem is the explanation of the poem. That's why modern art is no art like political art. Soviet art, Nazi art, Picasso art, Guernica, all political art is boring because it points towards something else, beyond art, an agenda. It has a reason. But true art is not reasonable. For reason we have words, we have logic, we have mathematics, we have all kinds of things. But reasonable art, look at Nazi architecture or even worse, Soviet architecture.
So the part of me that wants to ask why, and also the part that's really thirsty to know.
What?
The part of me that's really hungry to know, truth, is that it feels like it's my mind wants to know, but...
Yeah, but the mind, there is, at some point, there is the understanding that the mind cannot know.
It can't know.
Cannot know.
I know it can't know.
And then, but the bad news, it cannot know. The good news is it's not necessary for the mind to know because you are that which you want to know. So you know it, you know yourself with such a level of intimacy that no knowledge by the mind could approach it. It would be just a caricature of this knowing/being. You know that which we are because we are it. It cannot be more intimate than that. The other form of knowledge, there is a distance. You know an image of something, like we never know the computer. All we know is an image of the computer, right? But what we are, because we are it, we know it perfectly. In being it, we know it. And it gives itself away from moment to moment because it is, as you said, it is constantly changing. It is both something that doesn't change and also something that exhibits change. It has this duality, which is not real duality because it is the same thing, you see? It would be duality if there were two things, but it is the same thing. There is nothing outside of being. So there is only one being. And this being is both at peace and also in motion. But it is the same being. There is nothing outside it. It doesn't change in that sense. The changes happen within it, but it doesn't change. It's like an ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, that has been there for a long time. It's still at the same place. I mean, it doesn't change. I mean, of course, approximately, right? We are not talking about tectonic science or whatever, but it doesn't change. But from one day to the next, sometimes it's flat, sometimes, but it is the same ocean. So here it's the same. There is no change. The reality is changeless, like the Atlantic Ocean. But within it's always new, always different. See, there is no contradiction. It depends on how we look at it.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Francis, I don't know how many others can relate to this, but for me personally, much of this has been like a crisis of identity, I guess. I remember starting, first being interested in spirituality, and it was for a lot of the reasons we just heard, to know, to understand. But then at some point comes the understanding that the person that wants the most out of this gets nothing out of it. In other words, the little mind trying to get all the goodies from enlightenment or what have you gets nothing out of it other than realizing he may be a fraud, and it's in fact consciousness waking up to itself, and that's quite a shock. In fact, it's a huge shock. At least it was for me, because at a lot of levels it doesn't make any sense. Consciousness. It's hard for me to talk anything about consciousness, because what do you compare it to? There's nothing but consciousness. I mean, I could say consciousness, I guess it would be accurate to say it has the ability to project, seemingly so, to project an object. I don't want to ramble here. I guess if you could comment on the subjective aspect of consciousness. For example, an object of some sort, a thought, perception, what have you. Obviously, in some way, it's isolated from what it isn't, and there's a subjective quality to consciousness that observes the object in the same way that consciousness observes the absence of objects, like in deep sleep. Is that subjective quality always present? It's almost like consciousness kind of hypnotizes itself. And it seems like, to me, the subjective quality is always there, because always this pull toward the non-objective, whether it's deep sleep, people when they sometimes die or freeze to death, you know, that yearning to go to sleep. Even the animals, sometimes when they're killed on the range, as soon as they're caught, they kind of give up. There's that, it's very subtle, but you can see it sometimes. And everybody loves deep sleep, you know, that yearning for, it's not nirvana, it's not a total absence of objects, but again, the subjective quality seems to always be there, even if it's noticing the absence of objects. It's still a subjective aspect to it.
In the true absence of objects, there is only the subject. That's the door. We can be simultaneously knowingly in both dimensions. Just as we watch a movie, we know that we are also in the sofa, and that the sofa is safe. No matter what terrible things are happening in the movie. It's not like we are actually in the battlefield. We are in the battlefield, but we are safe because deep within we know we are in the living room. So it's the same here. It seems that we are in the world, but we know that we are in fact in the self. There is a passage in Plotinus. I remember translating it once, and I vaguely remember, but in this, it's very beautiful, very poetic, and says that once you are aware of, I'm just paraphrasing, of your true nature, which I guess he calls the one, of your true nature, is like having two heads. You say something, duocephaloi or something like that. Having two heads. One is the usual head that looks towards the world, and then it's like having a symmetric head in the back looking towards the one, towards the self. And then he has this metaphor. He says, he compares our activity in the universe as a dance. And the one, the self, our true nature, as the, how do you call that? The choregos in Greek, the ballet master. And I guess in ancient Greek, when they were dancing, they had the conductor for the ballet. And the choregos is in the center of the circle of the dancers. And he says, if you have only one head looking outwardly, you cannot see the conductor. And as a result, you are not dancing in rhythm and in harmony, and it's a mess. But the ones who have the two heads, with one head they look at their feet, I guess, but with the other head, they look at the ballet master, and in this way they all dance in harmony because the ballet master conducts the dance. And that I find it to be a beautiful analogy for impersonal action. You know, the difference between impersonal action or enlightened or wisdom is that we keep an eye on the conductor, and therefore the action is in harmony with other dancers and with the universe.
Well, it seems like the one head, by its nature, is always paying attention to the conductor, but the other head sometimes gets distracted or forgets to look over his shoulder.
Francis, could you speak about transparency? Today you mentioned it in the yoga, in terms of kind of being with the transparency between the postures. Just wondering, yeah.
You see, the idea is this. First, it's what in the yoga we are not trying to be logical and rational. We use images, and if the image works, that's good. As an actor, you know that, because in acting, in teaching acting, it's the same, right? You use images, right? It's very different if I am lifting a boulder, which is in fact made of cardboard, right? And the weight of each is half a pound or a pound, right? And I pretend to be Hercules, you know. Even if I am Hercules, I'm not going to go that way. I have to, right? So my movement is different according to the psychological input I place in it, right? Right? So if I suggest transparency, the movement is going to be different whether I suggest heaviness or compactness or opacity. So that's why I use these words, weightlessness, transparency. Why? Because the idea is this: the external space is transparent, right? So we usually see the external space as transparent, and that which is within the body as compact, opaque, matter-like, and that it has gravitas. So the idea is to take the transparency of the space outside and to bring it inside. You see, to equalize in a sense.
I find it also works in relation to other people too, to kind of grant them transparency.
Absolutely, yes.
Also, the acting analogy is interesting too, because
What?
the acting, that you mentioned acting, because it seems like the actor can be transparent, but the character might be
Absolutely.
totally, distorted. Or
The
whatever it
perfect
is.
actor is transparent. That's why in India, the Kathakali is considered also as a path to wisdom, at least traditionally. Because the perfect actor is not one who is cast because of its specific tendencies and idiosyncrasies, but it's one who is being perfectly transparent, can internalize all the emotions because it has no emotions of its own. You have to read, have you read the Borges about Shakespeare passage?
I don't think so.
It's Borges, right? Huh? Yeah, there's that one. So he will give you the passage. Since you like Shakespeare, it's a very interesting, it's very beautiful. And yes, so the perfect actor is one who can play all the characters because he can generate all the emotions, because he's devoid of emotions of its own, and as a result, on this blank page, he can draw anything.
Well, it's interesting. We were playing poker last night, and I'm not actually a very good poker player because I feel like I'm always telling the truth and being honest. So I don't know. I think that's it's interesting to think of acting as being.
So you played with a wicked lawyer.
Oh, and yeah.
Yes, and I was going to say truth and lawyers.
But it's interesting because I've heard before that there are two types of actors. There are actors who are really good at lying and actors who are really good at telling the truth. So I'm more the latter, I think, than the former. But it doesn't make me a very good poker player. So, yeah.
It's the same with, actually, with the phenomenon called empathy or sympathy. To the extent that we are devoid of our personal feeling, we are an open, a blank screen, a transparent place, which in the presence of other people and their feelings, we can feel the way they feel. We can really feel their anger, their frustration, and that's very interesting. And because in order to liberate ourselves from our own feelings, we needed to know how to process them, which is this total welcoming up and allow for them, contemplate them with benevolent indifference. When that happens in the presence of others, when we internalize, so to speak, their feelings, because we know how to deal with them, they don't affect us. And the fact that they don't affect us, and that at the same time we are able to feel the way they feel, it liberates the other person. It gives them a way out in a because what they thought was important, they realize is not important. They realize that the reason for their frustration or anger is empty, in fact. You see. If we process their feelings within us, they empty. I'm trying to give a rational explanation, but it's an experience. And ultimately, there is no rational explanation. It's something, in fact, deeper than that. But it has to do with love, it has to do with consciousness. It has to do with the fact that communication between human beings takes place on different, various levels. Like, as we speak, there is a verbal level, then there is a level of body language, and there is a more subtle level of empathy. And ultimately, there is a level of silence, which is the most fundamental, the most important, and for which no explanation is possible.
So when you say you're cleared of your own feelings, it's not that you don't have sensations anymore. It's
right.
that they're kind of
there is no psychological charge.
Right.
That there are no bodily sensations triggered by a psychological content. There can be sensations triggered by the position of the body, or by an illness, by a need of the body, etc. They can, of course, bodily sensations. But no. When we are transparent, we know moments when we are not frustrated, we are not angry. We know moments, hopefully, when we are empty of negative feelings, of negative emotions. In these moments, we are available. I'm always talking about an experience that we share. It's not something like Francis experiences, and that is not available. It's available to all of us. I'm not talking about spooky things, that.
It just seems like the body-mind always has habits in terms of interacting. That there's ways of behaving.
Like to say, how are you doing? It's a habit in interacting.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
No, not to say hi.
Right.
It's a habit.
Yeah.
It's a habit of interaction among human beings. It means I'm not going to kill you. Most of the time.
I wonder about how to be free in action. That's the thing. That was the
to be free in
action. Because it seems like all the actions that I'm taking are there's habits in them in daily life that
wait. First, habits are neither a bad thing or a good thing. Bad habits are a bad thing. Good habits are a good thing. That's a koan, right?
Yeah.
So, bad habits always trace back to the belief to be a separate entity. I mean, not always, because there can be habits that are detrimental to our health, that were inherited from our parents. They have nothing to do with ignorance. They have everything to do with, the way the human body-mind functions, and that we tend to perpetuate the type of activity our ancestors used to perpetuate. So, for instance, if they were eating food which is has been proven by modern science to be very unhealthy, we tend to prefer this unhealthy food out of habit. That has nothing to do with ignorance, you see. But in most cases, the bad habits, the one I call bad habits, are the ones that wouldn't be there if we wouldn't believe to be separate consciousness.
It just kind of seems like this thing is a robot in some ways and can be...
Yeah, but the robot part is good. You see, the point I was making, for instance, as you speak a language, I mean, it's mostly robotic. And it's good, because then it liberates you so you can think, you can reflect. You don't have to look for your words, they flow easily. Whereas when you speak in a foreign language, you have to look. How do they say that in German? I don't remember any longer. So you try to find, it's an effort. Or driving. The first time you drove, you were there, you know. Always focus on the slightest thing. Now you can drive, drink some scotch, listen to the radio, make a phone call, send a text message, all of that simultaneously, you know, and kiss your companion on the seat next to you. I mean, all of that together. I mean, it's wonderful. And you can drive with one hand. You have to.
I just don't see how the body can be free, and if it seems like freedom belongs to the absolute, and
yes, but the body has a default state, if you will, a natural state. And it has the organic memory of this state, because the newborn child was in this natural state, natural condition, or in the womb. And then ignorance has kind of superimposed onto it all these habits. But because of this anterior knowledge of its natural condition, this natural condition can be recovered once ignorance is kept in check. And the body in its natural condition is this transparency. That's the benchmark. This absence of boundaries. And that's how also a part of the teaching is like that, perhaps through the mirroring neurons, or some analog, some similar and unknown mechanism. If you are in the presence of, when I was in the presence of my teacher, I could feel this expansion in him, and then it triggered the same expansion in me, without me having to do anything. You know, or you feel the silence in someone, and then it triggers the silence in you. Every time I've met at least two disciples or people who have met Ramana Maharshi and who were spiritual, and there was this silence in them. It was almost tangible also. And the transparency and the expansion is part of the package. It goes with the silence, but it has a more bodily flavor to it, a three-dimensional aspect to it.
Yeah, it just seems too that on stage there's these moments where at times there is this expansion of freedom.
Yes, and that's the actors that have what is called presence. That's the secret for presence. It's that it's not something they can create, you see. It's something that, I mean, it's not something that they do while on stage, because it's something that is natural for them. It's something that can be cultivated as a training, as a practice. But when you're on stage performing, then it's no longer the case. And I'm going to give two examples. I was the violinist Isaac Stern. I was always, I saw him twice, and I saw him also a lot on movies or videos, but I saw him twice live. And he gave an impression of comfort while on stage. He was there, and it was like a friend coming, and the audience is like kids, there. And the friend comes and says, "Oh, Chida, I'm going to tell you a story." So, and then this story, and now it's funny, and now it's sweet and sad, but he felt comfortable, this comfort. And the comfort meaning this communication. You first communicate through the heart, with this openness, and then came the music. You see, so the real prelude was this presence. And so I had noticed that about him, especially because I had some knowledge of that due to my interest and my acquaintance with my teacher. One day I watched an interview of Isaac Stern. And he was saying that the first time he was on stage, I think it was either in San Francisco or in New York, I think in San Francisco. And when he came on stage, he said, "I had the feeling that's home, that's my place. That's where I live, that's home." And it was his destiny, it was his dharma, and that was very visible in him. Second example, and that's one that I haven't seen, but that hearsay from my teacher. My teacher was telling me that what was striking about Maria Callas when she was on stage, he says she was completely including the entire whole in her tactile body, if you will. She was there. So of course, in this friendliness, in this the feelings, the flow, and the expression.
It's really beautiful, especially about being at home on stage. Because for me, like when I performed on Thursday, I felt this kind of freedom that I rarely feel in my day-to-day life. So it's kind of this, it's some different space to be free, yeah. Thanks.
Mary. When you say to live in not knowing, 50% reasoning, is that not leaving the door open to fall back into ignorance? Is the idea not to waver from the 50-50 quasi-openness in not knowingness, thus allowing ignorance to appear and disappear in our freedom? When we live in not knowing, and the not knowing in question is about, is consciousness limited or is it universal? Is it mortal or is it eternal? That is the question. To be mortal or to be eternal, that's the question. What is important is to not know the answer, because we are the consciousness. And if we don't know the answer, consciousness will express itself freely. If we know the answer, we will somehow contrive, come up with a contrived answer. Whereas if we are in not knowing, it is not a fallback into ignorance. In not knowing, we are already no longer in ignorance. So it is far from being a door open to fall back into ignorance. If we are in not knowing, we are no longer in ignorance. Because ignorance is, strangely enough, to believe to know something. To believe to know that for certain that we are separate. That's what ignorance is. Once we remove this belief and we are in not knowing, we are no longer in ignorance, because consciousness will do its job and be whatever it is. Consciousness will shine. We remove the shackles we had put on consciousness. Tom, in last week's retreat, you talked about having not just intellectual understanding, but a connection between the body and the environment, I believe. Can you give practices, or as you call it, yogas, to accomplish this for people who have never been on a retreat? See that when you first see that there are two different bodies. There is the body that you see in the mirror and that other people see. That's a physical body. And then there is the body that you feel from within through your sense perceptions, through your bodily sensations. This body, I could call it the body of sensations, or the subtle body, or we could call it the body of energy. So that's the body we are interested in the yoga. The sensations. Now, if you look at the experience of your body of sensations as it manifests to you, you'll see that it's like an ocean in which the sensations are like fish swimming in this ocean. There is space between the fish. And if you look at the borders of this ocean or the walls of this aquarium, you'll see that there are none. So a yoga exercise is to ascertain, not intellectually, but to do that every time you believe to be a limited entity. Ask yourself, well, experientially, through the experience of my body, do I experience such limits, such borders? That's one example that you could do. David, questions from yesterday. It was 2 days ago, this question. And to yesterday, end of retreat week 1. Number 1, we ran out of time on Saturday during dialogues, so I would like to confirm my understanding and experience that real happiness and real peace are in fact synonymous with that space in which thoughts arise, bodily sensations and internal sense perceptions, and therefore are effortless. Yes, the quality of peace of the background as long as we don't make a concept of it, as long as it doesn't become an object, as long as it remains as this uncontrollable reality, both inescapable and unattainable. The moment we grab it, it turns out we are empty-handed. It defies, it escapes any attempt to grasp it, to grab it. Question 2. You have used the example of effort in working on a math problem till the solution appears in a flash of understanding. This process is very familiar to me for practical problems. I believe Helmholtz describes something similar he calls a creative process. But for questions about truth, it seems that a more relaxed attitude of asking is more efficient, instead of much efforting. Is this correct? and please comment. We have to be clear about what efforting means. In order to solve a math problem, you can have a very intense mind activity. But effort would come in only if you resist this mind, if there is a resistance. If it is effortless, if there is no resistance, all this mind activity counts as effortless. It's very important to be aware of this difference. Because of course, in order to resolve the math problem, you need to understand all the data, you need to see the connection, you need to make a few attempts to put them together. It's like a puzzle. If you enjoy solving puzzles, all of that is pleasurable. There are no resistances. On the contrary, if someone calls you, okay, come here, it's time to have dinner, you say, no, wait encore 2 minutes because I'm just into something here that is interesting. So it's the same about the truth. If you read a book, sometimes something seems to be far-fetched, and then it may require some activity of the mind. But the point is, do you wholeheartedly agree with this activity? It is this complete agreement with the activity that is the signature of the effortlessness. I don't think there is much difference in this case between the solution of a math problem or the solution of a question we have about consciousness. The difference is that math problems, they are infinite. So there will be always new conjectures to prove. Whereas in the case of truth, the solution is always the same, you see. So there is a moment when no much activity is needed to reach the solution, because we have reached the solution already so many times, so then it becomes instantaneous. So for that reason, at some point, it may seem to us that, yes, it is effortless. It is not that it is effortless, it is effortless and instantaneous. In other words, it doesn't require any mind activity. But even when it requires mind activity, it may still be effortless. Nancy, good to have some news. Strangely enough, you know, Nancy, I've been thinking of you. I don't know why you say that. Incredibly, she said, thoughtful of you to think of me. How do you know I was thinking of you? Because I was over the last 3 days ago or something like that. I guess that's the internet of hearts. Any questions here?
Hey, Francis. So, in the last times I've been being closer to the experience of being pure knowing, and it's brought a lot of happiness. But it seems that the main obstacle, and it seems like it's something that even blocks that experiential understanding, is the feeling of being a person, of being something separate. It seems that when this feeling is not there, accessing this experiential understanding is very easy, it's instantaneous almost. But when the feeling of being shrunk in this body is heavy or is strong, it's almost impossible. Is that?
Yes, but trust your intelligence. You have a good. You have good skills on that level. You know how to count cards.
It's not about counting.
And probabilities and whatever. So you have a good mind. So trust your intellectual, which is not intellectual, understanding, yes, and use it to be your guide when the feelings arise. When you learn how to fly planes, first you learn, in VFR, in viewing, not flying in the clouds. You don't use the instruments. You fly with your butt, we say, So you feel the acceleration, and it's very organic, this way of flying. Unfortunately, when you are in the clouds, it's misleading. It gives you the wrong impression, and if you trust your butt, you're going to crash. So you have to trust the instrument. So there is a passage when you lose sight of the ground and of the sky in the clouds. You are all in this whitish cotton. You need to trust the instruments. In this case, these misleading feelings are the cloud. So when you are in the cloud of your misleading feelings, trust the instrument of your reason.
I will phrase it other way. It seems that it is the happiness that is veiled, that is blocked, that is not accessible.
Well, it doesn't matter, because the habit will vanish the moment you stop repeating it. You see, there is something, the way to program a habit in the body-mind is through repetition. The way to deprogram a habit, a bad habit, is through avoiding the repetition of the bad habit and replacing it with a repetition of a good habit that replaces it. So, every time the feeling to be separate, and whatever this feeling is telling you what to do, if you allow for the feeling to repeat whatever it was that you were doing, you perpetuate the habit. On the other hand, if you use your reason and say, no, I'm not going to go there, and perhaps in the beginning you feel that you are going to die. It's like someone in the cloud. He feels like if he bangs to the left, he's going to crash, and that he has to bang to the right. But in fact, it's the opposite. The instrument tells him bang to the left, because in the way you are going to stabilize.
So it's just a matter of, at this point, of yeah, sometimes it's very tricky and it's not clear.
Well,
It's
you know,
what
we say in France, Paris was not built in one day. Not that it will take that long to get rid of the habit.
So it's almost experiential. Everything at this point is experiential. Is
Trust your intelligence. Trust your understanding of the truth. And don't indulge in the feelings. The feelings are misleading. Don't tell them, okay, I know what you're telling me, but I know that you are treacherous. I know that you are trying to con me because my reason is telling me otherwise. For instance, if the feeling tells you you are separate, you are mortal, tell the feeling, well, my reason tells me that what seems, according to you, to be so obvious is not obvious. That I am going to die, that I am a mortal entity, a mortal consciousness. Well, my body may seem to be telling me that, but my body doesn't really know. I kind of know better from direct experience. You know, the body doesn't have the experience of consciousness, only consciousness has the experience of consciousness, meaning you. Consciousness has the experience of the body, but the body has no experience of consciousness, so the body cannot tell you anything about consciousness. The body is wired for its own survival. The body is wired for fear and for fight, for escaping. Eating, sleeping, reproducing, drinking. That's what the body does. I mean, it's boring. Trust your reason. Allow for the reason to be in charge, to be the one that decides, the one that gives the orders, the one that... Never allow fear to be psychological fear. Now, physical fear, yes. You know, a car is rushing towards you. Don't stand in the middle of the road saying, even if you are on a how do you say that? Fußgänger. No, anyway. Passage cloté, a crosswalk. Even if you're on a crosswalk and the guy is rushing at you, trust your fear. Because actually, in that case, your fear and your reason would be kind of in agreement.
Well, this knowing is still not very clear that it's not mortal. This consciousness, it's not still very clear.
No, but it doesn't have to be clear. What has to be clear is that you don't know. What has to be clear is that you don't know one way or the other. That has to be clear.
I think you can get something stronger than that.
Yeah, but the way to start something stronger than that is to start from that. You cannot pretend to be further, because the question is, if I act out of reason, I can act only from the place I am with my understanding, right? And my experience. So that's already a very good place to start if you're 50-50.
I see very clear how often fear is the main motivation in.
Because if you're 50-50 as a poker player, right, playing the statistics, if you are 50-50 undecided as to is consciousness separate or universal, what is the optimal game strategy?
50% go with the separate theory, 50% the eternal theory.
Yeah. And then if you do that, you see, you are conducting experiment. And if every time you go with the theory of separate consciousness, you get slapped in the face.
I see.
Right? And if every time you go with the other theory, you get a piece of candy, you see? Or to talk about poker, you lose, and the other guy, you get some money, then it may change eventually your strategy. But it has to change in an organic fashion, you see? You have to start where you start.